The folder is sitting right there on my kitchen table, cream-colored, thin, holding maybe 12 pages that are about to change everything about how my name sits on this house, my savings, and every ordinary morning I have left. I have looked at it every morning this week the same way, with my coffee, with my hands wrapped around the cup, the way Clarence taught me, because he said warm hands make a settled mind. I have a settled mind this morning. There is a scratch near the edge of this table that I have never filled in, never painted over, never so much as covered with a placemat. Clarence made it the year we bought this house, moving the refrigerator by himself because he was too stubborn to wait for help. And the scratch stayed because after he was gone, removing it felt like removing him. The coffee ring beside it is mine. 7 years of the same cup in the same spot. I stopped apologizing for it a long time ago. This table has held more of my life than any other surface I have ever known. Tomorrow morning, my son sits across from me at this table and I sign those papers. And I have never been more certain of anything since I signed my name beside Clarence's on this deed 31 years ago. My name is Vernette Hollowell. I am 72 years old. I have lived in this house in Macon, Georgia for 31 years, raised one son inside these walls, buried a husband 7 years ago, and kept every light on by myself since. I am telling you this story because you need to understand what I believed when it started, and what believing it cost me. Before I go any further, if you are watching this right now, drop the time in the comments. I want to know who is up with me tonight. Landis came to me 8 months ago. Not with papers, just himself. Sat in that chair across from mine. Folded his hands the way I taught him when he was 7 years old. And said, quietly, like it meant something, "Mama, let me take care of you now. You have done enough." I want you to understand what those words did to a 72-year-old woman who had been doing everything alone since the man she loved dropped his keys on this table one Tuesday evening and never picked them up again. They opened every door I had. For 8 months he came, consistent, warm, patient in a way he had never quite managed before. He helped with the yard. He sat with me through 2 bad storms. He called on the days he could not come. He built a case, not with pressure, not with urgency, just with presence. The steady, reliable presence of a son who had finally decided to show up. I was not naive. I want that understood clearly. I have known Landis his entire life. I have watched him charm his way into things and drift his way out of them. I know who he is. I chose to believe this was different because the evidence in front of me said it was, and because I am his mother, and that means something about what I am willing to see. He asked me twice this week whether I had mentioned the signing to anyone. Both times I told him no. Both times he nodded like it was a small thing, just keeping it between us until it was done, he said. No need to make it complicated. I thought he was being protective. Tonight, I am going to sleep well for the first time in months. The decision is made. Tomorrow morning, I give my son the future he has been working toward. I did not know that someone already had other plans for tonight. Nettie Corrigan has been coming to this house 3 times a week for 8 months. She knows where I keep the extra chart forms. She knows I take my blood pressure medication with orange juice, not water, because that is what Clarence always brought me and I never changed it. She knows this house the way people know places they have spent quiet time in, not intimately, but honestly. That afternoon she arrived and did not come straight to the door. I was watching from the front room when I saw her slow at the end of the walk. She was looking at something on the street. A car I did not recognize, parked, engine off, nobody moving inside. She stood there for just a moment. Then she came in and said nothing about it. She took my pressure, wrote in her chart, moved through the routine the way she always does, except slower, staying past her usual time, asking me questions that sounded like small talk, but were not. Had I spoken to anyone lately about my plans? Was I sleeping well? Was I feeling settled about tomorrow? I told her yes to all of it. I believed yes to all of it. Then Landis called. I answered at the kitchen table. The conversation was short. He wanted to confirm the time for the morning, remind me to have the folder ready, make sure everything was still in order. My voice went careful the way it does when I am managing him without meaning to, keeping things smooth, keeping things on track. When I hung up, Nettie picked up the cuff again without saying a word and took my pressure a second time. She wrote in her chart longer than a single number requires. I noticed then that she was watching me more than usual, not staring, assessing, the way medical people do when something about a situation is not lining up cleanly in their minds. Her eyes moved once toward the parked car outside, then toward the folder on my table. A few minutes later, I went to my bedroom to get the copy of my insurance card she needed for the file. Ordinary. 30 seconds, maybe less. When I came back, she was at the counter writing. My phone was face up. Landis had called back and reached voicemail. I did not hear what he said, but Nettie was closer. She never told me exactly what she heard. Not that afternoon, not ever. What I know is what I pieced together much later. That whatever came through those few seconds of voicemail was not the voice of a son confirming paperwork with his mother. The tone was different. The direction of it was different. And somewhere in it, low and impatient, Landis said, "Just make sure she's there tonight." Not worried, not asking, instructing. By itself, maybe that would not have been enough. But added to the parked car, the repeated questions about whether I had told anyone about tomorrow, the way Landis kept checking details instead of asking how I felt. Something in Nettie shifted. She finished the visit. She capped her pen. She gathered her bag. At the door, she stopped. She turned back and took my arm, above the elbow, firm, the grip of a woman who needs to be certain she is heard. And she looked at me the way she had never looked at me in 8 months of coming to this house. "Miss Burnett." Her voice was low. "I need you to do something for me tonight. Go to Desi's. Take a bag. Don't tell anyone you're going. Just go. And if you wake up in the night, stay where you are." She held my arm a moment longer than she needed to. Then she was gone. I stood in my hallway and told myself she worried too much. That was her nature. That in the morning I would feel foolish and grateful and nothing else. I passed the kitchen table. The folder was sitting right where I left it, cream-colored, 12 pages, everything arranged for tomorrow. I did not open it. I went to my bedroom. I pulled a bag from the closet. I packed slowly, telling myself with every folded blouse that I was only humoring a worried woman. I knew I was not humoring anyone. I walked to Desi's at dusk. I knocked once. She opened the door before I could knock again. She looked at the bag. She looked at my face. She stepped aside without asking a single question. That is what family looks like. Desi Roundtree has never once asked me why. Not the night Clarence died and I knocked on her door at 2 a.m. because I could not be inside that house alone. Not the morning she showed up with food I had not asked for and stayed longer than the food required. Not tonight, when I arrived at her door at dusk with a bag I packed myself and a face I was not fully controlling. She stepped aside. She put food in front of me. That was all. Her kitchen smells the same way it has smelled for 24 years. Something with onion always. Something warm always. A particular combination I have never been able to name, but could find in the dark. I sat at her table and let it settle around me, the way you let a known place settle when the world outside it has gone uncertain. We talked about the street, a house 2 doors down that has been sitting empty for going on 8 months. Longer than it should, longer than makes sense for the neighborhood. We talked about nothing that mattered and everything that did, the way women who have known each other across decades learn to do. I almost told her about Nettie. The words came to my throat twice. Both times I swallowed them back. Nettie said, "Tell no one." I had given her my word without saying it, the way you give people your word sometimes, just by the way you look at them when they are done speaking. Desi noticed my bag on the chair. I saw her see it, the particular way she registers things, quiet and complete, without comment. She also noticed, I am certain, that I had not mentioned Landis once the entire evening. In 24 years of sitting in this kitchen, I have mentioned that man's name more times than either of us could count. Tonight, I said nothing. She filed it. She moved on. Ronette came through around 9:30, the way she does, checking in, not hovering. She sat for a few minutes. We talked. Then, easy as weather, she mentioned that she had seen Landis's car on the street twice this past week, parked, not coming or going, just sitting. She said it the way you say things on a close street. Plain observation, nothing attached to it. I kept my face exactly where it was. But something moved through me that I did not have a name for yet. Twice parked. Sitting still. And twice this week, Landis had asked me whether I had told anyone about the signing. Both times, I said no. Both times he nodded like it was nothing. I thought he was being careful. Sitting in Desi's kitchen at 10 o'clock at night, I thought about careful differently. Ronette said goodnight. Desi walked me to the guest room. Before she closed her own door, she tapped the wall once. A habit so old, neither of us remembers starting it. Just once. A way of saying, I am here and the night is all right. I tapped back. Through the wall, I could see the faint spread of light from her kitchen. She leaves it on every night. Always has. Something about a completely dark house that Desi has never been willing to accept. I used to tease her about the electric bill. I stopped teasing her years ago. I lay in the dark and told myself that in the morning nothing would have happened, and I would feel foolish and grateful in equal measure. I closed my eyes. I did not sleep. It was not barking. That is the first thing I want you to understand. I have heard that dog bark at squirrels, at delivery trucks, at a child's bicycle bell 3 houses down. That sound is noise. What pulled me out of whatever shallow rest I had found at 3:40 in the morning was something else entirely. Low, sustained, certain. The sound an animal makes when it has already decided that what it is sensing is a threat and is simply informing the house. Then Desi's footsteps in the hall. Then her hand on my shoulder and my name. Once, quietly. Vernette. I could have stayed where I was. Desi was already moving toward the window, but Nettie had told me to watch from afar, and I understood in that moment that watching was a choice, not an accident. I got up. I crossed the room. I stood back from the glass where the dark of the room would cover me, and I looked across at my house. 2 figures, moving along the side of my house with a slowness that was not casual. The careful, deliberate movement of people who have decided that silence is necessary. Not running. Not hesitating. Purposeful. One of them flashed a small light once toward the side windows and shut it off immediately. The other kept looking toward the street between movements. They were heading toward the side door, the one that opens to the back hallway, the one closest to the bedroom where I would have been sleeping. I did not scream. I did not move. Something cold arrived in my chest. Not fear, exactly, more like recognition. The feeling of something you already half knew finishing its sentence. Those men were going to my bedroom. And I was standing at a window across the street in the dark, watching them go there, and my legs were steady and my hands were flat against the wall, and I did not make a sound. Behind me, I could hear Ronette in the hallway, her voice low and even. Two individuals on the property next door, moving along the side of the house. The homeowner is not home. Calm. Specific. Every word placed. Desi did not leave my side. Across the street, Cortez and Reggie reached the side door. One of them tested the handle first, slowly, like he expected someone to be asleep on the other side and did not want noise. Locked. The house was completely dark. No television, no movement, no sound, no sense of a person breathing inside it. A house that was not sleeping. A house that was empty. I watched one of them go still for a moment. The way a person goes still when a plan has met a fact it did not account for. Then the flashlight appeared. Once more, quick, controlled, scanning toward the bedroom window before disappearing again. Then they left. Quietly, the same way they came. At 4:02 in the morning, a patrol car arrived. Officers checked the property, tried the doors, noted the side entrance, took Ronette's statement at Desi's door while I sat in the hallway and listened to Ronette give them details with a precision that I filed away even then. They said they would have a detective follow up. They left. Desi and I went to the kitchen. She made coffee. I sat down. Neither of us spoke for a long time, and neither of us needed to. The kitchen light that had been on all night was still on. Outside the window, the street was quiet and gray and beginning, very slowly, to show the first gray edge of morning. I thought about two men walking toward my bedroom in the dark. I thought about one question I was not ready to say out loud yet. The question of who knew I was supposed to be home tonight. Dawn came through the window. I wrapped both hands around my cup the way Clarence taught me. I need to think. He was at my door by 9:15. I saw him from Desi's front window first, standing on my porch, knocking, then stepping back and pulling out his phone, calling me. I watched him do it with the particular patience of a man who has a reason to need an answer and is disciplining himself not to show it. I picked up my bag. I walked across the yard at my own pace, unhurried, bag in hand. When he saw me come through the side gate, his face did something that lasted less than a second, and then was gone. I have known that face for 48 years. What I saw was not relief. Relief is what moves through a person when someone they were frightened for turns out to be safe. What moved through Landis's face in that fraction of a second was something that had to pass through a different calculation first. Unexpected information arriving, being processed, being filed. And then the relief came, settled on top of whatever was underneath it. And by the time he reached me, he was already my son again. Warm, concerned, both arms open. He held me. He asked how I was. He asked why I had stayed at Desi's. I told him I had not been sleeping well. Too much on my mind before a big day. I watched him accept it. Watched his shoulders drop a degree. Watched his body make the small adjustments of a man who has received the information he needed and can now relax into the role he came here to play. "Are you still comfortable with this morning?" he asked. I noted the word. Comfortable. Not ready, not sure. Comfortable. A word chosen by a man confirming a decision he has spent 8 months building toward, deploying it softly, the way you handle something you cannot afford to have break. I told him yes. The relief that moved through him the second time was clean. No calculation underneath it. Just a man who believed he had already won. Exhaling. He stayed 20 minutes. He was warm. He was patient. He was exactly what he had been performing for 8 months, and I performed back. Grateful. Settled. A mother glad her son had come by. We were both working, and only one of us knew it. He did not ask about the police car. A patrol unit sat outside this house at 4 in the morning on a street where people know each other's rhythms and recognize every vehicle. But by the time most porch lights came on, the officers were already gone. Ronette had kept the conversation at her doorway quiet and close. Still, someone watching carefully, someone invested in this house, would have noticed enough to ask questions. He said nothing, not one word. After he left, I stood on the porch and watched his car until it turned off the street. Then Ronette appeared at Desi's door and told me she had mentioned Landis to the officer who took her statement. The pressure about the signing, the visits, the pattern she had watched from across the street for months. The officer had noted it. A detective had been assigned. And the lawyer Ronette had spoken to that morning had already confirmed that Landis would receive no notification that law enforcement was building anything around him. I went inside my house. I stood in the hallway. I looked at the folder on the kitchen table. The same folder I had looked at all week with a settled mind and a full heart. I picked it up. I read every page, slowly, with different eyes than the ones I had been using. Then I picked up my phone and asked Desi for the name of that lawyer at her church. Adrian Foxworth's office looked exactly like a woman who had been doing this work for 20 years and had stopped needing to impress anyone. Files on every surface. A window with the blinds halfway. A desk that had held enough difficult conversations that it had the particular settled weight of furniture that knows its purpose. She gestured to the chair across from her, and I sat down and told her everything. The 8 months. The signing. The night at Desi's. The 2 figures moving along the side of my house. The expression on my son's face the next morning. And the one question nobody had asked yet, about who knew I was supposed to be home. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 3 questions. Whether Landis had prepared the documents himself or used an attorney. Whether my name appeared on any deed transfers already filed. Whether there were other family members with any claim on the property. Then she got to work. What she recommended was a revocable living trust. My name as trustee for as long as I am alive and competent. Landis named as successor, but with conditions attached to that succession so precisely worded that he could not touch the house or the savings while I was standing. The structure still looked close enough to the transfer arrangement he had already spent months expecting. Property references, signature pages, successor language, administrative wording he would recognize just enough to stop reading carefully. The document would reference the property. It would carry my signature. It would show his name. To a man reading quickly and finding what he expected to find, it would look exactly like what he had spent 8 months working toward. It was not. She asked me whether I thought Landis would read the conditions carefully. I thought about that. I thought about a man who had been so certain of me for so long that he stopped checking. Who had managed my love like a resource he had already secured. Who sat across from me at my own table and heard what he needed to hear because he had decided what I was going to say before I opened my mouth. I told her he would not read carefully. That reading carefully would mean admitting he was not certain, and he had never once allowed himself to be uncertain about me. She nodded and wrote something down. Before we left her office, she made one call, brief, professional, to the detective assigned from Ronette's report. 2 tracks confirmed, moving together, neither one alerting the other's target. 2 days later, Landis came to my kitchen. Same table, same chair. I slid the documents across. I watched him look at the pages the way a man looks at something he already knows the contents of. Scanning for his name, for the property address, for the shape of what he expected. He found all 3. He signed where indicated without asking Adrian, who was sitting at my table in plain sight. a single question about what successor trustee with conditions meant in practice. He did not ask, because asking would have meant he was not sure. After he signed, he stayed for coffee. He was warmer than he had been in months, the particular ease of a man who has exhaled after a long time of holding his breath. He talked about plans, and then, lightly, the way you offer something carefully wrapped. "There's someone I want you to meet soon, Mama. Someone important." I asked gentle questions. I smiled at the right moments. I filed everything. After he left, Adrian gathered the documents from my table. She looked at me across the same surface where my son had just signed his own name into a structure he did not understand. "He doesn't have your house, Miss Burnett. He has a piece of paper that says he might, someday, under conditions he cannot currently meet." I looked out the kitchen window. Desi's kitchen light was on. "Good," I said. "Now let's find out what else he has." The detective came back to Desi's kitchen properly this time. Not a follow-up knock, a scheduled conversation, notepad open, questions prepared. Ronette sat across from him and gave him everything she had been carrying for longer than anyone had thought to ask her about. The car parked on the street twice in 1 week, sitting, engine off, not arriving or leaving. A conversation she had half heard through Vernette's open front window several months back. Landis's voice moving. Through it with the patient, managed quality of a man steering something rather than discussing it. The way Vernette had stopped mentioning her son casually after his visits became frequent. A subject that used to come up naturally going quiet, in a way Ronette had noticed and filed without knowing why. She was precise. She was thorough. She gave him dates where she had them and descriptions where she did not. 2 doors down, a neighbor had a security camera covering the street. It took time to get the footage. The homeowners were out of town for several days, and detectives had to come back once they returned. A vehicle, plates, partially visible, make and model, clear enough, had been parked between 3:30 and 3:55 on the morning in question. Detectives spent days cross-checking partial plate information against vehicle registrations and known associates connected to Landis's recent phone activity before a name surfaced. Cortez. Adrienne told me what happened in that interview room the way I asked her to, plainly, in full. Cortez had an attorney present. By the time detectives sat him down, they already had the vehicle footage, the phone contact history between him and Landis, and separate corroboration placing him near my street that night. Reggie had been interviewed before him. Cortez knew that too. A deal was discussed. Reduced exposure in exchange for cooperation before formal conspiracy charges were finalized. He did not cooperate immediately. His attorney requested breaks twice during the interview. Cortez minimized first. Claimed he had only been asked to check the house. Claimed he never intended harm. But every time he tried to narrow his role, the detectives placed another piece of evidence in front of him. Another timestamp. Another call. Another inconsistency. He read the room in the first 20 minutes after that and made his decision. He gave up Landis completely. The hire, the timeline, the specific instruction that it needed to happen the night before the signing. Because with no voluntary transfer yet completed, if I died that night, the house and everything in it would pass directly to Landis as next of kin. No trust, no competing document, just a death and a son and an inheritance that moved cleanly. He did not need me to sign anything. He needed me to die before I did. His partner confirmed everything separately in a later interview with his own attorney present, after another week of negotiation between counsel and detectives. Every material detail matched. Then Adrienne paused. She told me there was something else. This was not the first time Landis had contacted Cortez. 3 months before that night, 3 months before I'd even fully agreed to the voluntary signing, Landis had reached out to ask about options, not to hire, just to ask. Cortez declined that conversation. Landis came back 6 weeks later with a specific plan and a number. The phone records confirmed the earlier contact when the detective finally obtained the subpoena return. Adrienne let that sit between us for a moment before she continued. He was building the contingency before I had finished saying yes to the primary plan. Before I had finished agreeing to give him everything freely, he was already making arrangements in case my love turned out not to be enough. He never trusted it. He studied it. He used it. And underneath all of it, he never once believed it would hold. Adrienne told me the amount Cortez disclosed, the number Landis had decided my life was worth. I did not react. I heard it, and I placed it somewhere I was not ready to open yet. The case was still building, she said. A recorded conversation with Landis corroborating his knowledge would make it unassailable. A few more weeks for the financial documentation to establish motive fully. Then I keep going, I told her. That evening, Landis called. Cheerful, making plans, asking whether the weekend worked for a visit. I told him it did, and I would look forward to it. I sat at my kitchen table after the call and looked at the chair where he had signed his name into a structure he did not understand. He had counted on my love to make me blind. I was never blind. I was patient. There is a difference, and he never learned it. Desi did not soften it. That is one of the things I have always valued about her. She does not wrap difficult things in extra material to make them easier to hold. She sat across from me at her kitchen table and she said the name plainly. Yolanda Spriggs. Ronette had heard it through the kind of knowing that moves through a close neighborhood the way weather moves, quietly, completely, without announcing itself. Landis had been seen with her regularly, enough times in enough places that it had become a known thing to people who pay attention to known things. I sat with the name. Then I sat with what the name meant. Landis needed the house immediately. Not at some point. Immediately. A man who has made promises to someone about a future he does not yet have cannot afford patience. Every week that passed without the transfer was a week he had to keep a story going in 2 directions at once, telling me it was about love and care, telling her it was almost done. Yolanda Spriggs was not a detail at the edge of this. She was the pressure behind every visit, every folded hand, every careful word he placed across from me at that table for 8 months. When he said, "Let me take care of you, Mama," he was also saying something else entirely to someone who was not in the room. Then I thought about what Adrienne had told me, that he had contacted Cortez 3 months before that night, before I had fully agreed, before I had finished deciding. I had been thinking about that as a measure of his desperation. I understood now it was something colder than desperation. Even if I had handed him everything freely that morning, signed every page, given him the house and the savings and every ordinary morning I had left, I would still have been a problem. A living mother can change her mind, can walk into a lawyer's office, can revoke what she gave. He was never going to let me remain a variable in whatever he was building with Yolanda Spriggs. The voluntary signing was always Plan A. I was always going to become Plan B's target. Not because he ran out of options, because he never trusted that love alone would hold. And he started making sure of that before I had finished saying yes. I thought about the number Adrienne had told me. The amount Landis had decided was sufficient. I am not going to tell you what it was. I will only tell you that when I heard it, I understood something about how completely he had stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as an obstacle with a price attached. I called Adrienne. I told her about Yolanda. She noted it without surprise. What Landis had told a woman he was building a future with about timelines and property, and a mother who was about to sign everything over, constituted evidence of premeditation and motive. that the financial investigation could now reach. She told me not to approach Yolanda directly. Not yet. I went quiet after the call. Clarence always recognized that particular quiet. He said I went somewhere interior that he had learned not to follow because I always came back from it with something decided. I sat with it until it became something I could carry. Then I ran my finger along the scratch near the edge of my table, the one Clarence made, the one Landis grew up eating beside, the one he looked at across 30 years of Sunday mornings and decided was worth more as a line item than as a memory. I loved him. I want that understood without performance or apology. I loved him the way mothers love the children they raised, with full knowledge of what they are and the persistent, irrational hope that love alone is enough to close the distance between who they are and who you raised them to try to be. He knew it. He knew exactly what that love looked like from the inside, and he used every part of it. So did I. Adrienne told me everything because I asked her to. Not the summary, everything. I needed to understand what had been built around my son while he was calling me on Tuesday evenings to talk about the weekend. So I asked Adrienne to walk me through it the way she would walk a jury through it. She did. It had taken weeks. Subpoenas for phone records, follow-up interviews, attorneys delaying responses long enough to review exposure before allowing their clients to speak again, Cortez's lawyer negotiating before every additional statement, detectives cross-checking dates against surveillance timestamps, and financial records before anything moved forward officially. Nothing about it had happened quickly. It had happened carefully. Cortez sat in a recorded interview with his attorney present and the detectives, evidence laid out in front of him, the surveillance footage, the partial plate, the phone records, the earlier contact that nobody had thought to pull until Cortez himself disclosed it. He read what was in front of him, made his decision, and gave Landis up in full. The hire, the timeline, the specific instruction that the job needed to happen the night before the signing and not after. I asked Adrienne why the timing mattered that specifically. She explained it the way she explained most things. Plainly, without decoration. Landis was not trying to inherit from me while I was alive. The law does not work that way. What he needed was for the voluntary signing to not have happened yet. If I had signed those trust documents freely that morning, my house would have been inside a legal structure he did not control. One that kept him waiting on conditions he could not meet while I was standing. But with nothing signed and nothing transferred, if I died that night, the house and everything in it would pass directly to him as my next of kin under Georgia law. Clean. Immediate. No contest. The signing was the threat to that path. So the signing had to be preceded by something that made it irrelevant. She said it plainly. He was not waiting for you to die. He was removing the obstacle to what he would inherit when you did. Reggie was interviewed separately, different room, different day. His attorney requested delays twice before allowing a recorded statement. When he finally spoke, his account matched Cortez's on every material point. When two people who have been kept apart tell the same story with the same details, the story is true. The phone records confirmed the earlier contact. 3 months before that night. The debt documentation confirmed the pressure. Motive was established not just through confession, but through the paper trail of a man who had been running out of road for longer than anyone knew. Adrienne told me they had enough for charges. But a recorded conversation with Landis, legal in Georgia, one party present, no notification required, would close every argument his defense could make about fabricated confessions or misidentification. It would be the final piece that made the case something a jury never had to deliberate long over. She asked if I was willing. I did not hesitate. But I had one question first. When I sit across from him at that table, will I be in any danger? She told me the detective would be nearby, that I would have a signal. That's not what I asked, I said. I asked if I will be in any danger, not physical danger. She looked at me for a moment, then she understood. No, she said. You'll be the safest person in that room. That evening I called Landis. I kept my voice easy, told him I had been thinking about the documents, that there were a couple of things I wanted to understand better before everything was fully settled. Asked if he could come by later in the week. Sit with me at the table the way we used to. He did not pause, did not hesitate. Of course, Mama. Of course. I hung up. I looked at my table. The chair across from mine sat empty in the evening light. Come on then. Come on to your mama's table one more time. He brought coffee from the place on Mulberry Street that I mentioned once, 8 months ago, that I liked. He remembered. Of course, he remembered. He had been remembering everything I said for 8 months, cataloging it, storing it, using it back on me at exactly the right moments. He set the cup in front of me and smiled, and I thanked him, and we sat down at my kitchen table, and I was the calmest I had been since this began. Not peaceful. Finished deciding. There is a difference. Somewhere outside this house, a detective was positioned. Adrian had reviewed everything with me the evening before. I knew what I needed, and I knew how to move toward it without announcing I was moving at all. I started with the documents, genuine-sounding questions about timelines and care provisions. What happens if my health changes, whether the structure allows for adjustments? I watched him answer. Patient. Thorough. The performance of a man explaining something to someone he has already won. He was good at it. He had been good at it for 8 months, and he was still good at it now, and I let him be good at it for as long as it served me. Then I shifted. I told him I had been thinking about the night I stayed at Desi's. That something had been sitting with me. I mentioned carefully that the police report noted 2 men had been seen moving along the side of my house that night. I watched his face. His response came without a pause that lasted too long, without a word misplaced. He asked if I was all right. He suggested it was probably opportunistic, people checking for unlocked doors. He said, it happens everywhere. The important thing was I had not been home. He was warm. He was measured. He sounded, to anyone who did not know him, exactly like a son processing frightening news about his mother. What I heard was a man who had already decided what he would say if this moment arrived. Fluency is not the same as honesty. I know what his surprised voice sounds like. I know what it sounds like when something catches him genuinely off guard. This was not that. This was a voice moving through a prepared space, and the preparation itself was the thing I needed the recording to capture. Then he said it. At least you were lucky you weren't home. Lucky. I let that word sit in the space between us for exactly 1 breath. Then I moved on. I asked about his plans. He talked, more than he should have, because he believed the hard part of the conversation was behind him, and he was relaxed now, back on solid ground. He mentioned pressures that had been building. He mentioned someone he wanted me to meet. No name, just someone. A future he had been working toward for a long time, a timeline that had finally come together. He described it in the past tense, a plan that had executed, a man reporting results. After he left, I sat at the table without moving. The detective collected the recording. I stayed in my chair and looked at the space where Landis had been, at the scratch in the wood beside where he rested his arm, at the cup he left behind, his fingerprints on the ceramic in my kitchen, at my table. I picked it up. I washed it. I dried it. I put it away in the cabinet where it belonged. When Adrienne called, I was still standing at the sink. That's enough, she said. I'm ready, I told her. It's time. The detective did not approach Yolanda Spriggs as a suspect. He approached her as a woman with knowledge, of Landis's finances, his timeline, the specific pressure he had been operating under for months. Her attorney was present. The conversation was recorded. And Yolanda, who had spent enough time around Landis to understand how quickly a situation could become something you could not walk back from, did not start by cooperating. Adrian told me Yolanda minimized first, said Landis exaggerated sometimes, said she assumed he was venting about debt and stress and family tension, said she never asked detailed questions because she did not want detailed answers. Her attorney let her speak for a while. Then the detective began laying things out one piece at a time. The dates Landis discussed, the financial records, the timeline around the signing, the statements already provided by Cortez and Reggie, both represented separately, both corroborating each other on every material point. Adrian said Yolanda stopped interrupting after that. Then the detective mentioned the phrase, one way or another. The room changed. Landis had described the house to Yolanda in detail, the address, the value, the timeline. He had told her the situation with his mother was going to resolve soon. He had told her she was going to be taken care of, that everything he had promised her was almost in place. He had given her dates and amounts, and the kind of specific assurance that a man only gives when he believes the outcome is already determined. And he had told her, and this is the detail that stayed with me, that one way or another, the house was going to be available very soon. One way or another. Yolanda did not ask what the other way was. But sitting in that room with attorneys present and recorded statements already on the table, she understood exactly how those words sounded now. That was when she started talking fully. She provided text messages, dates of conversations, financial specifics, his debts, his creditors, the amounts he owed, and the pressure those amounts were generating. Her attorney reviewed everything before it changed hands and advised cooperation formally on the record. The case file grew thicker. She was not charged. Adrian explained later that investigators had no evidence Yolanda knew violence had been planned in advance or participated in arranging it. What they had was a woman who benefited from what she chose not to examine closely enough. The detective noted her cooperation formally in the record, and the case against Landis did not require her prosecution to succeed. She had been a witness to a plan she chose not to examine too closely, and that choosing not to examine it was its own kind of answer about who she was. I sat with what Yolanda deserved. Not legally. Adrian handled the legal question. Personally. The question of what I thought about a woman who had accepted a future built on my dispossession without asking enough questions about how that future was being constructed. She knew the house was not his to promise. She knew his mother was elderly and living alone, and that he was operating on a timeline that required me to give up everything I had. She accepted that arrangement because it served what she wanted, and she kept accepting it for as long as it served her. She did not send men to my bedroom. There is a difference between selfishness and murder, and I am not willing to collapse that distance for the sake of clean outrage. She made choices that served herself at my expense. When those choices became dangerous to her, she made different choices that served herself at his expense. I understand that completely. I do not have to forgive it to understand it. Through Desi's network, I heard some weeks later that Yolanda had ended things with Landis quietly. No announcement, no confrontation. Just gone. The way people leave situations when they finally understand what the situation actually was. She got out. That is something. Adrian filed in Bibb County Superior Court a formal application under Georgia law barring Landis from any inheritance or estate benefit from me in perpetuity. A person who attempts to take the life of another cannot profit from that person's death. The law has a name for it, and Adrian knew exactly where to place it. The criminal case was ready. Every piece in position. You've already done your part, Adrienne said. I thought about 8 months of visits, the folded hands, the careful words, the number Cortez disclosed, the phrase one way or another that a woman heard and chose not to pull on. I've done more than my part, I said. I've done his too. I was in my kitchen when it happened, not across the city watching, not standing outside his building with my arms folded, waiting for the moment. Here, at my own table, coffee in my cup, both hands around it the way Clarence taught me, the morning light coming through my window the same way it comes through every morning, regardless of what the day is carrying. I knew the time. Adrienne had told me the approximate window, and I had made my decision about where I would be during it weeks before this morning arrived. I could have gone. Nobody told me I could not. There is no rule that says a mother cannot stand on a sidewalk and watch her son be taken into custody for arranging her murder. I had earned the right to be in that frame if I wanted it. I did not want it. He had come to my house. He had sat at my table in my kitchen, using my coffee and my 31 years of ordinary mornings as the stage for everything he performed. He had made this house the location of his plan. The place where he managed me, where he calibrated his warmth, where he signed documents he did not read carefully enough and left fingerprints on a cup I washed and put away. I was not going to let his arrest happen here, too. He needed to be taken at his own door, in his own space, in the life he built on the back of what he took from me. My trust, my love, my willingness to believe that the child I raised had finally decided to become what I raised him toward. That is where it needed to end for him. Not at my table. Never again at my table. Adrienne called at 9:47 in the morning. Landis was in custody. The detective had noted, in the way that details get passed along when they are significant, that Landis had been calm when they came. No performance of surprise, no attempt to run. Just a man standing at his own door who looked at the people in front of him and understood that the road had ended and went quietly. The particular calm of a man who has been waiting for something to arrive and has finally stopped waiting. I sat with what I had expected to feel. I had imagined relief, the clean, full-bodied kind. I had imagined something close to satisfaction. I had wondered, in the quiet of several late nights, whether grief would arrive alongside everything else, whether loving someone and watching them be arrested for your attempted murder could exist in the same body at the same time. What I found was quieter than any of those things, something that did not have a clean name. The particular settling that comes after carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and being able to set it down, not because everything is resolved, but because your part in it is finished. You did what needed doing. You can put it down now. I called Desi. I did not have to say much. Ronette had already heard through the same network that always knows before anyone announces anything. There was a silence on the phone between us, not empty, full. And then Desi said 3 words. Come for dinner tonight. Not a question. I hung up. I looked out my kitchen window at the quiet street. I looked at the chair where Landis sat the last time he was in this kitchen. I reached over and pulled it out slightly. Just slightly. An empty chair at a table where he no longer belongs. I left it exactly that way. Then she goes to get ready for dinner at Desi's. I have thought about that afternoon many times since. Not the night at Desi's window. Not the morning Landis arrived performing concern. The afternoon before any of it. Nettie Corrigan walking up to my front door and slowing at the end of the path because there was a car on the street she did not recognize. Not a neighbor's vehicle, not a delivery. Just a car. Present. Engine off. She noted it the way a woman who visits vulnerable people alone has trained herself to note things that do not belong. Then she came inside and said nothing about it and did her job. During the visit, I stepped away to my bedroom. 30 seconds, maybe less. While I was gone, Landis called back and reached voicemail. Nettie was close enough to the counter to hear fragments, not a full sentence, not anything she could have transcribed and filed as evidence. Just a tone. A direction in his voice moving towards someone who was not me. An instruction where there should have been a question. She took my blood pressure twice. She wrote in her chart longer than a single number requires. And at the door, she made the only move that would actually help me. She could have filed a welfare concern report through her agency. That report, by standard procedure, would have gone to Landis as my next of kin before it reached anyone positioned to act on it. Whatever she suspected, the official route would have handed him the warning before it handed me anything useful. She knew that. She went directly to me instead, put her hand on my arm, and spoke quietly in a doorway, and put her professional judgment on the table without being asked. If the night had produced nothing provable, if Landis had walked free, the question of how I came to be at Desi's would have been asked eventually. Her name would have been in that answer. She knew that too. I wrote the letter with Adrian's guidance. Formal, specific, addressed to Nettie's nursing agency and the Georgia Board of Nursing. I did not frame what she did as a protocol deviation. I framed it as the action of a professional who correctly assessed that standard procedure would endanger her patient and chose patient safety without hesitation. I documented the outcome, my survival, as the direct consequence of her judgment. I requested the letter be placed in her professional record as commendation. Adrian reviewed every word. It was filed. Through Desi, I learned that Nettie had been carrying a financial burden for long enough that she had stopped expecting it to lift. Nothing dramatic. The persistent kind of weight that makes ordinary months harder than they should be. I asked Adrian to help quietly, not to erase a life overnight, just to remove the part that kept turning every month into recovery from the last one. A few weeks later, Nettie received notice that one of the medical debts she had been struggling under had been satisfied anonymously through a patient assistance arrangement Adrian structured carefully and legally. She will know it was me. There is no other explanation that holds. But she will never ask, and I will never confirm it. And that silence is not empty. It is the specific language of two people who understand each other without requiring the words. She came for the final visit on a Tuesday, took my pressure, wrote in her chart, moved through the routine the way she has for over a year. At the door, she paused. The same doorway, the same pause. This time, I spoke first. "You gave me the only thing I needed," I said. "You gave me one night." She took my arm, the same arm, above the elbow, the same grip that started all of this. And she nodded once. Then she was gone. I stood in my hallway. The same hallway where I stood the evening she left, holding my own hand, not yet knowing what the night would bring. I looked at my kitchen. She goes to make coffee. Before I went to dinner, I went to see Adrian. Not about the criminal proceedings. Those are moving. Landis is in the system. That part of the story belongs to lawyers and courtrooms and processes that no longer require me to be the one doing the work. I went because there was something I needed to make legal that had always only been true. I updated my will. I revised the trust documents. Adrienne also tightened every protection already in place around the estate. The criminal filings, the inheritance bar, the trust language itself. She said plainly that between the plea structure, the Georgia Slayer statute filings, and the revised estate documents, Landis would have no realistic path to challenge anything successfully later. Then she went back to her paperwork like she had merely commented on the weather. That steadied something in me more than I expected. Desi Roundtree and Ronette Roundtree are named as my primary beneficiaries. If I ever sell this house, they have right of first refusal. The right to match any offer before it goes to a stranger, to keep what has been part of their life as long as it has been part of mine. And in the formal acknowledgement section of my estate documents, in language Adrian drafted and I approved word by word, the Roundtrees are designated as my chosen family. Not as a sentiment tucked into a letter that gets lost, but as a legal fact recorded in Bibb County and attached to everything I own. This is not sentiment dressed as law. This is law used to make sentiment permanent. I have one son. He will spend the foreseeable future inside the Georgia criminal justice system, answering for what he chose. Everything I almost gave away, the house, the savings, 31 years of ordinary mornings, is still in my hands. I get to choose again what to do with it. This time, the choosing comes from clear eyes, and clear eyes see exactly who has been standing in my corner since before I knew I needed a corner. I told them at dinner. No documents on the table, no formal presentation. I waited until we had eaten, until the kitchen was warm and Ronette had made Desi laugh about something on the street. And then I told them plainly that they were in my will, that the house carried their name in the event I ever let it go, that the paperwork now said what I had known for 24 years and never said with the full weight it deserved. Desi did not cry. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers and left it there. That was all. That was everything. Ronette cried, briefly, without any apology for it, and then asked in a tone that was entirely practical whether the right of first refusal applied if she wanted to paint the front porch a different color once it was hers. Desi laughed. The kind of laugh that releases something. The room went from sacred to ordinary in exactly the right way, the way it can only go when the people in it have known each other long enough to let it. I said one thing before we moved on. You were my family before I knew I needed saving. I just wanted the paperwork to match. Desi's hand stayed on mine for another moment. Then Ronette said something else practical, and we kept talking. And the evening went the way evenings go in kitchens where people belong to each other. Walking home across the yard, I stopped at Desi's window and tapped once against the glass. Soft. Just enough. The kitchen light blinked twice. I see you. I'm here. We're all right. I walked into my house. I locked the door behind me. I stood in my hallway and I breathed. Not the held breath of someone waiting for something to happen. Just air. Just mine. Just ordinary. Her house. Her lock. Her choice. Tomorrow she would call Adrian about the next step in the criminal proceedings. But tonight, she was simply in her house, with the kitchen light blinking twice across the yard, and everything she loves still intact. The first time I saw Landis in court, he did not look at me. Not once. He stood beside his attorney in a navy suit I bought him for a job interview years ago, hands folded in front of him, face still, jaw tight, eyes fixed somewhere just above the judge's shoulder, like dignity was something he could perform after everything else had failed. I sat 2 rows behind the prosecutor with Desi on one side and Ronette on the other. Nettie sat farther back. She did not tell me she was coming. I saw her when I turned my head before the hearing started, sitting near the aisle with both hands folded over her purse, posture straight, face calm. Our eyes met once. She nodded. I nodded back. That was all we needed. Adrian leaned close before the judge came in and said, "You don't have to speak today unless you want to." I looked at Landis's back. For months, he had filled my kitchen with words. Soft words, careful words, words shaped like concern and built like traps. He had used my name, my age, my grief, my loneliness, my memories, and my trust as tools. He had spoken enough for both of us. So when the prosecutor asked whether I wanted to give a statement, I stood. Landis's shoulders moved then. Just slightly. I walked to the front with my paper folded in my hand. But when I reached the place where they told me to stand, I did not open it. I looked at the judge. Then I looked at my son. I am not here because I hate him, I said. I am here because I loved him long enough to almost hand him everything I had. And when that was not enough, he decided my life was the remaining obstacle. The courtroom stayed quiet. I did not cry. That surprised me less than I thought it would. I said, I want the record to show that what was taken from me was not just safety. It was the ordinary belief that my child could sit across from me at my own table and mean me no harm. That is not something a sentence can restore. But I am asking this court to make sure he never profits from what he planned. Landis lowered his head. Not in shame. I know shame. Shame shakes something loose in a person. This was calculation finally meeting a locked door. The judge accepted the plea agreement. The details were read into the record. Conspiracy, solicitation, financial motive. The formal bar against inheritance remained in place. My house, my savings, and my estate would never pass into Landis's hands by blood, pressure, pity, or legal accident. When it was over, I walked out without looking back. Outside, the air felt too ordinary for what had just happened. Cars passed. Somebody laughed near the courthouse steps. A woman adjusted her child's collar. The world kept moving with no respect for the size of what had ended inside me. Desi took my hand. Ronette said, "Dinner at our place tonight?" I almost smiled. "No," I said. "Tonight, you're coming to mine." That evening, I set my table for 3, not 4. 3. I cooked slowly. Greens, cornbread, baked chicken. Nothing fancy, just food that knew how to fill a house. When Desi and Ronette came through the door, I did not feel like a woman recovering from betrayal. I felt like a woman choosing who crossed her threshold now. After dinner, Desi washed plates, though I told her not to. Ronette stood at the window, looking across at her own kitchen light. I went to the table and ran my fingers over Clarence's scratch. For the first time in a long time, it did not feel like the mark of what I had lost. It felt like proof of what stayed. Later, after they went home, I locked my door. I checked it once, not twice. Then I turned off every light except the one over the kitchen table. Across the yard, Desi's kitchen light blinked twice. I stood there in my house, with my name still on it, my breath steady inside me, and no son's shadow sitting in the chair across from mine. And for the first time since that cream-colored folder appeared on my table, I slept through the night.